Hello everyone and welcome to Apollo's Artifacts. I am your host, Joshua Smith. And since I have so much news to cover, I'm not going to waste time on pleasantries or preambles. So let's begin here with an article from Cassandra Fairbanks, an outstanding reporter. Biden's DOJ says arsonist who killed someone during BLM riots should get lesser sentence because he was protesting. So they say because he has approved of motives, they don't care what his methods were. Joe Biden's Department of Justice has said that a man who killed someone during the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020 should get a lesser sentence because he was, quote, caught up in the fury when he burned down a pawn shop. Montez Terriel Lee Jr. broke into a Minnesota pawn shop, poured gasoline, and lit it on fire on June 5, 2020. A 30-year-old man named Oscar Lee Stewart was found dead in the rubble over 2 months later. Lee's actions were caught on camera. 100% Fed Up reports that, quote, according to court records, one of the videos captures Lee standing in front of the burning shop saying, F this place, we're gonna burn this B to the ground. Instead of facing the typical sentence of 200 months, U.S. Attorney W. Anders Folk recommended less time because of the motives behind the arson and killing. Quote, Mr. Lee's motive for setting the fire is a foremost issue. Mr. Lee credibly states that he was in the streets to protest unlawful police violence against black men, and there is no basis to disbelieve this statement. Mr. Lee appropriately acknowledges that he could have demonstrated in a different way, but he was caught up in the fury of the mob after living as a black man, watching his peers suffer at the hands of police, the memo stated. The memo was practically gushing and could have been written by the defense, but went on to point out the unpredictable nature of fires. And listen to the absurdity of this sentence. Mr. Lee states that he checked the building before he set the fire to make sure no one would be hurt. If true, this is at least some small measure of precaution. Are you kidding me? This insanity is what pours forth from the heads and mouths of leftist professors all across America. I mean, where do you think that this prosecutor learned to think this way in the first place? He was taught this. He was taught to think this way, to think that leftism is okay no matter how it's expressed. You can bash old grannies over the head with 2x4s, you can beat people up in the streets, punch them in the face, stomp them on the head when they're on the ground, kick them to death, literally, set fires, burn people up, and who cares because the left is upset about things. Usually upset about things they completely misunderstand or don't have any understanding of at all, or have just been lied to by the scumbag media. Continuing here, the memo said that while some people may have been exploiting the chaos, he did not believe it to be the case with Lee. The memo continued here, quote, as anyone watching the news worldwide knows, of course, the leftist garbage mainstream media, corporate news, many other people in Minnesota were similarly caught up. Well, it was mostly peaceful, right? There appear to have been many people in those days looking only to exploit the chaos and disorder. What chaos and disorder? We were told that these were just protests, mostly peaceful protests. I continue, in the interest of personal gain or random violence. There appear also to have been many people who felt angry, frustrated, and disenfranchised, and who were attempting in many cases in an unacceptably reckless and dangerous manner to give voice to those feelings. To give voice to those feelings, see, that is leftist professor language right there. Mr. Lee appears to be squarely in this latter category. And so the ruling judge, it says here, ended up granting a much lighter 120-month term of imprisonment, of which I'm sure he will serve very little and probably be out in about 1.5 years. And then he'll probably be given an honorary PhD from someplace like the University of Michigan, and then they can just invite him in to be a professor and tell others how to express their anger and frustration and explain how they've been disenfranchised. And that it's sometimes okay to bash old grannies over the head and bust out all the windows and set buildings on fire and do $2.5 billion worth of damage and kill 36 people. Mostly peaceful, though. And over here on the Post-Millennial, they have an article about the same issue, and they have another outrageous and egregious quote from the same memo, as it says here, Mr. Lee was terribly misguided, and his actions had tragic, unthinkable consequences. but he appears to have believed that he was, in Dr. King's eloquent words, engaging in the language of the unheard. So that's what riots are, the language of the unheard. Burning down buildings, burning up cars all over the place, throwing Molotov cocktails, battering people to death in the streets who are trying to defend their stores from a rampaging evil mob of terrorist scum. So I move from that leftist travesty to yet another leftist orchestrated travesty here in the Daily Mail. Quote, "They created a double life for my daughter. Parents of girl 12 who tried to hang herself twice at school after months of secret meetings about her gender identity slammed district staff who went behind their backs as they liken it to sex offenders who take advantage of a child and try to keep things in secret." That is precisely what they're doing by violating parental rights. It begins here. The parents of a 12-year-old Florida girl who tried to hang herself twice at her school after months of secret meetings about her gender identity are slamming the district staff who allegedly went behind their backs and created a double life for their daughter. Wendell Perez and his wife Maria Perez alleged the staff at Patterson Elementary School, where their daughter was enrolled, violated their parental rights by failing to inform them of the alleged gender identity crisis and developing a plan to help her address it without their consent. We're talking about the staff from school, this information, and developing a plan of several sessions with my daughter for months, talking about issues that are related and that the parents need to be involved, Wendell Perez told Daily Mail. They basically created a double life for my daughter. We're not talking about an isolated incident that a little kid mentioned something. They acted on it for months. What is next? If we let them do that, what is next? I don't know what's next. They may force us to put things in our bodies that we don't want in our bodies.
We're talking about the staff from school having this information and developing a plan of several sessions with my daughter for months, talking about issues that are related and that the parents need to be involved. And they basically created a double life for my daughter. So we're not talking about an isolated incident that a little kid mentioned something. They acted on it for months. What is next? This is about parental rights. This is not about any other issues. It's about parental rights. It's about our constitutional rights and our rights under the laws of our state of Florida.
All right, and I think it's pretty obvious there that they are Hispanic, but I want you to note here how the left doesn't actually care about Hispanic people or Latinos or Latinas or Latinx or any of that other stuff, right? Because they're outranked by another issue right now, which is the trans agenda. And the trans undoubtedly rank higher in the left's hierarchy of needs right now. And the left will destroy anyone. It doesn't matter if you're black. It doesn't matter if you're female. It doesn't matter if you're Hispanic or Latino or any of these other categories that they proclaim to actually care about. They will destroy any of you and all of you for their other agendas. Because remember, everything they do is about power and control. They want to control everything in your life, every decision, every action, period, across the board. And this here is a photograph of the elementary school in question. And here are some of the subjects of the lawsuit who are implicated in involvement here. And maybe you would want to contact this area to express your displeasure with what has been taking place. But always be kind and always be polite, because they'll use that against you if you call in cursing and making threats. Here from the New York Post, we have this. Teammates say they are uncomfortable changing in locker room with trans University of Pennsylvania swimmer Leah Thomas. A member of the University of Pennsylvania women's swim team said some team members are uncomfortable changing in the locker room with transgender swimmer Leah Thomas, according to a teammate. Well, I'm sure with a big schlong dangling around, they are quite uncomfortable being in there, considering this is not their boyfriend or their husband. It's just some random dude who's walking around in the locker room with them. I can't imagine there are many women who would feel comfortable in that situation at all. And as you get down into the article here, you get to the crux of the whole matter, and this is where leftist philosophy takes over once again. This person said, "It's really upsetting because Leah doesn't seem to care how it makes anyone else feel." See, leftists never do. They only care about their feelings. To hell with everybody else. The 35 of us are just supposed to accept being uncomfortable in our own space and locker room for like the feelings of one. Exactly. That is what the left expects everybody to do. Because if you feel uncomfortable in any way at all, you're transphobic. And of course, a phobia means an irrational hate or fear of something. But how can we say that this is irrational for them to be upset about a dongle flopping around in their locker room? And for the height of absurdity here, we have from the Daily Mail, exclusive, "We're uncomfortable in our own locker room. Leah Thomas, UPenn teammate, tells how the trans swimmer doesn't always cover up her male genitals." Does any of that garbage make any sense? But welcome to 2022, folks. Let's see what other madness we can get from the left as this year continues. Oh, what do we have here? 26-year-old transgender child molester gets 2 years in a juvenile facility thanks to Marxist Los Angeles DA George Gascon. That's right. So you have a 26-year-old dude who raped a kid, and for his punishment is going to be put into a juvenile facility, I'm guessing, with females, his preferred victims. And regular listeners or viewers of my show will probably connect this in their mind to the story that I covered recently where there was a prisoner who was a serial killer of women but is now trans, so now he is being placed into a prison with other women, his preferred victims. This is the pure insanity of leftism. It's the external outworkings of the inner philosophy, and the inner philosophy is vile and evil and destructive, and thus everything that flows from it will be evil and vile and destructive. It begins here. A 26-year-old transgender bio male child molester who pleaded guilty earlier this month to sexually assaulting a 10-year-old girl back in 2014 was sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile facility thanks to a George Soros-backed LA district attorney. Back in 2014, the then 17-year-old James Tubbs grabbed a 10-year-old girl by the throat at a Denny's in Palmdale, California, and sexually assaulted her in a bathroom stall. And as a parent, I just have to say here, where are the parents? Where are the people who are supposed to be watching this girl? My girl is not going to the bathroom unobserved when she's 10 years old. She's not going to be attacked in a bathroom stall if I have anything to say about it. It continues here. Since the sexual assault in 2014, James Tubbs has transitioned to Hannah Tubbs and is now 26 years old. Does he or she identify as 26 years old or 12 years old or 17? Do we even know anymore? The far left district attorney said that he did not want to send Tubbs to jail because he feared he would be victimized and assaulted over his gender identity. Well, cry me a river. And as it points out here, very importantly at the bottom of this article, it says, recall that George Gascon, the DA, put in place by George Soros' billions, announced his radical policy change after he was elected in late 2020. Number 1, end cash bail by January 2021. This is a thing the left is doing all over the disastrous big blue cities. 2, conviction integrity unit, whatever that is. 3, no death penalty. 4, felony charging no longer seeking enhancements, such as gang affiliation. 5, juveniles will not be tried as adults. 6, use of force review board to reopen fatal officer-involved shooting cases going back to 2012. So get ready to be persecuted if you are a police officer. Gascon, it says here, was previously the DA of the literal shithole San Francisco and absolutely turned that place into a hellhole. I agree. Here from Zero Hedge, more leftism on full display. Murder and chaos overruns Baltimore as liberals fail to maintain law and order. And again, here I contest the use of the word liberals. It's leftists. Leftism is not liberalism. They're very different. And saying that leftists want to maintain law and order is a very much confused position because they don't care about that. They love the chaos. They love the disorder, the disruption, the destruction, the fires, the killings. It begins here by Tyler Durden. We want to ask our readers, why is it that the most liberal metro areas have some of the worst violent crime in the country if liberals are so peaceful and loving? And remember, they always tell you that they're compassionate and they're empathetic and sympathetic. We gravitate to Baltimore City, where the city's top prosecutor halted prosecuting minor crimes in early 2021. Before the new policing approach, the metro area had already been overtaken by a violent crime wave since the 2015 riots, and it's only getting worse. According to local news WMAR TV, 25 days into the new year, there have already been 31 homicides. We're not even a full month into the new year, and already Baltimore City has seen more homicides this year than there have been days, the local news station said. Well, keep on voting for the left, and you're going to get more death. And here you can see a chart here of the crimes and the increase. And of course, I'll have this link below so that you can check it out for yourself. And speaking of San Francisco, we have this. Anti-Asian hate crime spiked 567% in San Francisco in 2021. One man who targeted Chinese-owned businesses committed more than half the attacks in just 5 months before his arrest last August. Preliminary numbers indicated hate crimes targeting Asian American and Pacific Islanders in San Francisco went from 9 in 2020 to 60 in 2021. That represents an over 500% increase, although officials believe the actual numbers are higher because people are reluctant to report to the police. Probably because they think that they're not going to do a damn thing, right? Which, all in all, is what the left voted for. Sometimes you get your just desserts, but nobody ever said you were going to like it. Police believe that 36-year-old Derek Barreto, who was arrested last August, is responsible for 31, more than half of the incidents reported last year. Reports of anti-Asian hate crimes in San Francisco increased more than any other category of hate crimes last year. An Lee, an elderly Asian American man who was attacked 2 years ago in San Francisco, announced he was suing the DA's office over mishandling the case. And of course, that would be the same DA who's now down in Los Angeles, ruining that city. Next, I have this from Zero Hedge, from Michael Schellenberger's Substack, Why San Francisco is Denying Reality. And we have a cute little picture here of drug addicts shooting up in San Francisco. The San Francisco Chronicle has acknowledged that the city is operating a supervised drug site, but the city continues to deny it. Why? The San Francisco Chronicle today published an article confirming that San Francisco city government is operating a supervised drug use and drug dealing site on public property and within the auspices of a linkage center, ostensibly to link homeless addicts to rehab. The revelation that people are using drugs at the site was first reported on the Substack newsletter of Michael Schellenberger. San Francisco city government officials are denying that they are operating a supervised drug consumption site. A spokesperson for the department running the linkage center denied the city was operating a supervised consumption site. When asked by the Chronicle what happens if someone tries to use drugs in the outdoor or indoor areas of the linkage center and whether staff will allow the practice to continue, they did not answer directly. And here we have another picture of people just shooting up in broad daylight and outdoors. And from that leftist insanity, we go to even more here at the Chicago Thinker. Disgraced FBI number 2, Andrew McCabe, tells University of Chicago students the feds should be weaponized against conservatives, which is of course what he was already doing in his career as a thug government dirtbag. The article begins here. Have you ever wondered what disgraced former FBI directors do after trying to stage a coup and lying under oath? Apparently they give talks about, quote, protecting democracy at top-rated institutions of higher learning. Indeed, this last Thursday, the University of Chicago Institute of Politics invited former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe to join a panel of partisans to discuss the January 6th insurrection. And just to think, in another life, many years ago, I was almost on my way to the University of Chicago for a PhD. Glad that that route did not take place. Life intervened in a positive way for me. McCabe was fired as the deputy FBI director for leaking sensitive information about an investigation into the Clinton Foundation and then lying about it under oath. He also took part in spying on the Donald Trump campaign through a secret warrant granted by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court. The dossier he used to obtain the surveillance warrant was funded by Hillary Clinton's campaign and, ironic twist, was itself the product of Russian disinformation. McCabe and his allies in corporate media justified all sorts of similar illegal and undemocratic tactics to discredit and attempt to unseat President Trump. And I'm not here to defend Trump at all, I'm just reading the article to you. But it says here, below are 4 of the most appalling assertions and policy proposals McCabe made at this public event. Number 1, conservatives are in the same category as Islamic terrorists. McCabe likened conservatives to members of the Islamic Caliphate. Quote, I can tell you from my perspective of spending a lot of time focused on the radicalization of international terrorists and Islamic extremists and extremists of all stripes is that this group shares many of the same characteristics of those groups that we've seen radicalized along entirely different ideological lines. McCabe went on to describe the rise of the Islamic Caliphate in Syria and how Islamic extremists were radicalized across socioeconomic, educational, and racial lines, likening it to the mass radicalization of the political right across demographics. What a fool and a liar. That's right, according to McCabe, a grandma who shares a Federalist article on Facebook and your uncle with a Let's Go Brandon coffee mug are in the same category as a jihadist who has just killed 49 people at an Orlando nightclub. Number 2, he also said that parents at school board meetings pose a threat to national security. Political violence is not just confined to the Capitol. It's going on in school boards around the country. Bullshit, dude. It's going on in local elections. It's happening, even to healthcare workers. What is this lunatic talking about? Healthcare workers are being attacked by the left right now when they refuse the vaccines. Number 3, McCabe points out that he wants more surveillance of mainstream conservatives. He says, I'm fairly confident, meaning that people on the inside have already told him, that the FBI and other agencies, like the NSA, I'm sure, and DIA and CIA, have reallocated resources and repositioned some of their counterterrorism focus to increase their focus on right-wing extremism and domestic violent extremists. This is the same old line that came out when Clinton was president, all through the 1990s. And number 4, McCabe went on to contend that no one is above the law, except, of course, himself. Ironically, one of McCabe's last remarks was a proclamation of equality under the law. Whether you are a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter, right, left, or otherwise, you should all be able to agree on the principle that no one is above the law. This is the BS that leftists always spew and never mean. He continued here, from the lowliest trespasser on Jan 6 up to the highest ranking government official who may have been aware of a plan that would ultimately lead to violence on the Capitol. Those people should be held accountable, period. And if we can't do that, that is just another sign that we are becoming a non-functioning democracy, meaning if we don't throw Trump in prison, it's the end of our leftocracy. And moving momentarily from the left-wing dirtbags, I move over to the right-wing dirtbags, the neocon scum of the earth. Here from Glenn Greenwald, the neocons' primary war tactic, branding opponents of U.S. intervention as traitors. And of course, scum, pieces of trash like David Frum here, always do that. And of course, he has his new ally in Watermelon Head, Joe Scarborough, who we still have not ever found out what happened to that girl that was found dead in his office many years ago. I still think there needs to be an investigation of what this beady-eyed little bastard might have been involved with. As the article begins here, one of the most bizarre but important dynamics of the Trump-era U.S. politics is that the most fanatical, war-hungry neocons who shaped Bush-Cheney militarism have become the most popular pundits and thought leaders in American liberalism. They have not changed in the slightest. They are employing the same tactics they have always invoked and for the same causes. But they have correctly perceived that their agenda is better served by migrating back to the Democratic Party, which originally spawned their bloodthirsty ideology. And that is the truth the neocon scumbags did originally come from leftism. They hijacked the right because it was easy to tie their militarism to patriotism, so that when they invaded foreign countries, they could say, what, you don't love America? You're not a patriot? This went on for 8 years under Bush, while the left called him a neo-Nazi, they called him Hitler, and all that kind of stuff, but now they love him because he's come out and criticized Trump, and he kisses Michelle Obama on the cheek and hangs out with the Clintons. Even the maniacal war demon, Dick Cheney, is now being embraced by the left because he came out and criticized Trump. But that's how laughably and disgustingly hypocritical the left is as a whole. The article continues here. The excuse offered by Democrats for their embrace of neocons, we did it only as a temporary coalition of convenience to oppose Trump, is false for many reasons. This unholy alliance predated Trump. In 2014, long before anyone envisioned Trump descending down an escalator on his path to the White House, the journalist Jacob Heilbrunn wrote a New York Times op-ed entitled The Next Act of the Neocons. He predicted, correctly as it turned out, that the neocons may be preparing a more brazen feat, aligning themselves with Hillary Rodham Clinton and her nascent presidential campaign in a bid to return to the driver's seat of American foreign policy. And of course, they've always been comfortable allying with a warmonger like Hillary because she loves the wars just like they do. The corporate media outlets consumed most voraciously by liberals are filled to the brim with war-loving neocons. Liberals catapult their books to the top of bestseller lists, spread their viral tweets, build their credibility into contracts with CNN and NBC News or stints as columnists for the New York Times and the Washington Post, both of which, of course, are laden with CIA, and giddily applaud their cover stories for The Atlantic and The New Yorker. And that's because the neocons decided a long time ago they don't care one whit for the culture wars taking place in America. They don't care if the left destroys absolutely everything culturally, so long as they get their war. And I'm not going to continue reading this here. I'll have it linked below so that you can check it out and you can read all about the scumbags like the little chicken neck wimp Rick Wilson and Bill Kristol, also a dirtbag scumbag. Same for Jennifer Rubin, one of the most hideous creatures that you'll ever see gracing the newspapers anywhere. And finally, the infinitely hateable Max Boot, who is nothing but pure scoundrel in human skin. Changing it up a bit here, we have this. Meta is building the world's fastest AI supercomputer. Powerful device that will help Facebook transform a metaverse will be ready by mid-2022. And of course, this is to prepare you for your Matrix devices where they're going to plug you in and you'll never come out again. You'll be living in some nasty little rat hole. You'll have holes in your shoes and your clothes, but you won't care because inside of your artificial virtual environment, you'll have gold shoes and a giant mansion and a Lamborghini to drive around in, and you'll care more about your artificial reality than you do your physical body in the real world. That's the ultimate plan. That's just another aspect of the other trans agenda. That's the transhumanism or post-humanist agenda, of which the trans or transgender agenda is just a subset. You have to think really, really big picture here to understand where the left is wanting to go with all of this. Here from the American Thinker, I have this, Exposed: The Selective Bigotry of the Campus Diversity Industry by Henry Kopel. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, I always personally arrange it as diversity, inclusion, and equity because it is DIE, is now big business across American campuses. A 2021 Heritage Foundation study found that the average American college employs 45 full-time DIE administrators, with a reported average salary of $79,400. The average DIE budget exceeds $3.57 million. Hence, across more than 4,000 colleges nationally, America's total college DIE bill tops $14 billion. And again, that is what your money is going to toxify the brains of all these kids, or young adults, as it were. Leftism spews the most dangerous mind viruses in the entire world. It is so inherently destructive that it will eventually take down Western civilization if allowed to continue. The article continues here. One would hope that such massive investments yield tangible gains in the DIE bureaucracy's self-described mission, namely assuring an inclusive campus environment for all students. Unfortunately, a new study shows that the campus DIE industry not only fails this test, but also, at least towards one minority group, actively subverts its stated goal, and I would say it's actually 2 minority groups. The study, released by Heritage just a month ago, examined the public social media statements of over 700 DIE administrators from 65 colleges. It revealed a tsunami of extreme and false denunciations of Israel and its supporters. Of the DIE staffers' frequent mentions of Israel, 96% consisted of libelous indictments, frequently accusing Israel of engaging in genocide, apartheid, settler colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and other extreme crimes. And that's one of the strangest things that with the bedfellows that the ADL and SPLC have made, is that they are still in bed with the left, just eaten up with leftist philosophy. But the left, by and large, hates Israel. And I mean that word in all caps, hates Israel. And hates Zionism. One diversity administrator liked and retweeted this message: WTF is a liberal Zionist. What's next? Liberal Nazi? Liberal colonizer? Liberal murderer? Another tweeted, in an echo of the medieval blood libels that incited bloody violence against Jews, quote, Israel has a particular loathing for children. They target them with violence specifically and intentionally every single day. Many DIE staffers' tweets called for Israel's outright elimination from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Apparently, those falsely charged with genocide must themselves be targeted for genocide. Other DIE tweets denounce U.S. supporters of Israel, including a conspiratorial indictment of a vast philanthropic lobbying complex in the U.S. that works tirelessly to present Israelis as benevolent and peace-loving, while in actual no one bothers with this pretense. And definitely I would say that Israel and Israeli Jews and Zionist Jews are discriminated against by the left heavily, but the other group that isn't mentioned here are Asians, who are increasingly being blocked from admission to universities because merit has gone out the window and everything is just focused on skin color or ethnicity or genitalia. The obsessions of the left, that is. Here from Yoichi Shimatsu, an exclusive report to Rents.com, China's fusion super reactor, green energy or lethal weapon. Hailed as an artificial sun by the Chinese news media, a record-setting plasma energy experiment was a triumphant statement from the East, or the Experimental Advanced Superconducting Tokamak Energy Laboratory in Hefei, Anhui Province in east-central China, west of Nanjing. On December 30th, the National Fusion Energy Program accelerated particles of tritium and deuterium, heavy water sourced from the coolant water of conventional nuclear reactors inside a toroid or ring-shaped vacuum raceway, called from its Russian origin a tokamak. To prevent the gigantic apparatus from melting down, high-charged electromagnets herd the particle flow through the hollow center of the tokamak wall, permitting some of the deuterium to slam into the lithium lining called a blanket to create added tritium for the fusion process. By quickening the pulsations along the magnetic ring, the repulsive electric energy that keeps each single nuclear particle intact is gradually overcome by rising heat and the thrust of acceleration. At super high speeds, electron bonds that surround the nuclei start to weaken. Think of how that snug-fitting cap is blown off your head when the bicycle gets up to full speed and your hair is tousled in the human-powered wind. At that critical moment, the attraction between the two nuclei enables their fusion, creating a particle of helium, a cluster of two nuclei with two electrons. The surplus material is ejected as high-energy neutrons, plus various fragments of subatomic detritus. This transformation releases surplus energy, which manifests as intense heat. As reported by the EAST team, practically unthinkable temperatures were attained, up to 5 times hotter than the interior of the sun, or 158 million degrees Fahrenheit, or 70 million Celsius, for a record-setting 17 minutes. That's enough raw power to light up Beijing, Shanghai, New York City, and Hollywood on a cold, dark evening. It's even hotter than the heat wave of a nuclear bomb explosion. And I would say that my suspicion about this is sort of the equivalent of a Death Star type device. And this is a fantastic article that goes much more in depth about this issue, and I'll have it linked below so that you can read it for yourself and see what you think about it. Switching over from some of that high-minded material to the lowbrow material of the left again, Washington University in St. Louis hosts an event claiming professionalism is racist because it silences marginalized people of color. Because POC, can't be professional, right? I mean, that's the hideous implication of this. Washington University in St. Louis is hosting an hour-long virtual event dubbed Is Professionalism a Racist Concept? Event organizers contend the term is inappropriate because a person's appearance has nothing to do with job knowledge. So yeah, just come in with your fly unzipped. Your dongle can be flopping around, as we have in the transgender case at the University of Pennsylvania. Who cares about that? You can have one shoe on, one shoe off. You could be wearing an old wife beater with spaghetti stains all over the front of it, but everybody should respect you and treat you as a professional. So-called professionalism is coded language, a construct that upholds institutional racist policies and excluding practices. Of course, typical professorial leftist language. It says here, this presentation will explore dismantling white supremacy and privilege in various contexts while upholding social justice and advancing effective workplaces in which all contributors can bring their full selves to the job site. Except white folks, of course, because they're not welcome. How dare you bring your professionalism in here, you damned supremacist. And of course, I'll have this insanity linked below. Here from the Daily Mail, California mom takes legal action against school district after 2 teachers secretly manipulated her daughter, 11, into believing she was a transgender boy and gave tips on how to bind her breasts. And again, this mirrors the case that we started off with earlier in Florida, where the Hispanic parents are very upset about their daughter, 12 years old, who attempted to commit suicide twice because she was being manipulated secretly behind the scenes by crazed kook leftists who are trying to destroy people's lives, thinking that they know better than you do, thinking that they know better than parents. And indeed, that is one of the central core claims of leftism, is that children don't belong to their parents. They belong to society at large. And so they should be able to intervene in any way and whatever way that they so choose, because you're lesser than. You're part of an old patriarchal nuclear family structure that is by definition to them evil. But of course they don't believe in true evil because they don't believe in God. But they absolutely do believe in power and control, and those are the 2 things they want most. It says here, California mom Jessica Conan took action against Spreckles Union School District. She is claiming that 2 teachers manipulated her daughter into changing her gender identity. The legal claim states the district was responsible for extreme and outrageous conduct that led the student on a path towards transitioning as a boy. Conan says that 2 middle school teachers who ran the school's equality club planted the seed that their daughter was bisexual in the 6th grade. The mother claims that she was kept in the dark by the school about a gender support plan created by the administrators, because administrators know more and better than parents, who carried the child in their womb and birthed the child and changed the child's diapers and fed them and all the other things that go into being a parent, up until the 6th grade, when magically the leftist dirtbags at a school can just come in and know better and more than you because some professor somewhere has taught them to know better and be better than you are. And now let's take a look at this one. Woke U.S. University bans offensive words such as grandfather and man and red. And here are the hysterical reactions to Trump being elected from crazed leftists, because their brains are just all filled with emotionalism and everything to them is like a raw nerve. A woke U.S. university has banned staff from using ordinary words used by most Americans because they might offend or upset some students. The University of Washington released an inclusive language guide last week that lists a number of so-called problematic words that they deem to be racist and sexist and ageist or homophobic. According to the guide, such words as grandfather, housekeeping, minority, ninja, and lame are considered deeply offensive and must not be uttered by anybody at the university. According to the university, the word lame is harmful because it's ableist. This word is offensive even when it's used in slang for uncool because it's using a disability in a negative way to imply that the opposite, which would be not lame, is to be superior, the guide declares. But I thought even disability wasn't a word that we can use anymore either. I thought it was other-abled. The guide also warns that the word minority implies a less-than attitude towards others. But it's the left who uses the term minority all the time. Obsessively, they use this term. That's going to excise like 25% of their language if you take that term out. When minority is used to refer to other races or abilities, what do you mean other races? Are you meaning that you're assuming all races are white except these other races? Who wrote this? Used as a generalized term for the other. It implies a less than attitude toward the community or communities being discussed, the guide declares. News.com.au reports, it says here, the guide considers grandfather a problematic word because the term was used as a way to exempt some people from a change because of conditions that existed before the change. Grandfather clause originated in the American South in the 1890s, it says, as a way to defy the 15th Amendment and prevent black Americans from voting. Housekeeping is another problematic word that the guide recommends should be avoided by others working in the information technology industry because it can feel gendered, and it's all about feelings, right? Phrases with man, such as manpower, man hours, or man in the middle, is considered not inclusive and thus sexist. The language guide also considers preferred pronouns as problematic because the term preferred suggests that a person's pronoun is optional. See, you can never be far left enough for the left. Ever. It's always going to eat itself in this type of insanity. And that's all I can take of this. I'm not going to read any more. Here we have this from the Gateway Pundit. Denver Elementary School is teaching kids to, quote, disrupt the nuclear family and support BLM, or Black Lives Matter. Centennial Elementary School in Colorado is teaching children to disrupt the nuclear family and support the Black Lives Matter movement. The teachings were outlined in an instruction guide for kindergarten and first graders on the Black Lives Matter guiding principles for their Black Lives Matter week. The shocking document was obtained by the organization Parents Defending Education. And here you can see a photograph where it shows that this same elementary school also enjoys hosting racially segregated playground nights, where it says here, families of color can come to the playground on this night, but I guess that means other people who are somehow absent of color. I don't understand how white people don't have color. That doesn't make any sense. But they're not welcome. So it's back to Jim Crow for the left. But it's the right kind of Jim Crow this time, right? The Denver Gazette reports that, quote, among the listed principles was, quote, globalism, which the school described as our ability to see how we are impacted or privileged within the global black family. Also listed were transgender affirming black families, which was defined as a space that is family-friendly and free from patriarchal practices, and black villages, which is the disruption of the Western nuclear family dynamics and a return to the collective village that takes care of each other. Remember the Hillary Clinton thing, it takes a village. Essentially what this is really getting at is the collectivist nature of the left, whereas the right tends to be individualist. And we see here a listing of these so-called Black Lives Matter guiding principles, and it has all kinds of just a leftist hodgepodge of Marxist insanity here. This is just neo-Marxism translated for the year 2022. That's all this is. And down here at the bottom it lists being unapologetically black, whatever in the hell that means. And this article again is from the great Cassandra Fairbanks. Here we have this. Detroit man is granted $5,000 bond days after, quote, setting his pregnant with twins girlfriend on fire and burning 60% of her body. And again, this was done by a Democrat district attorney, just as we saw in San Francisco and Los Angeles earlier, probably also funded by George Soros. And remember, the left always says, we care about women, we care about minorities, we care about feminism and all this kind of stuff. But no. Watch how that always takes the literal back burner here to where this guy can set this woman on fire who's pregnant, burn up most of her body, and then he's out on bail. Well, no problem. It says here, convicted drug dealer Devon Marsh allegedly doused his 26-year-old girlfriend with lighter fluid and ignited her on fire after the pair had an argument. Because that's how you unapologetically have an argument, is you set someone on fire. when you disagree with them, right? That is the lesson that they've taught us with the riots, right? I mean, it's acceptable. It's the voice of the unheard. He was just expressing his voice of the unheard when he set her on fire, okay? That's leftist logic for you. The woman, who was 27 weeks pregnant with twins, suffered burns to 60% of her body and remains hospitalized in critical condition. It remains unknown whether her unborn babies will survive the attack. But does the left care about that? I mean, wouldn't that just be a form of abortion? And that would be a good thing for the left. They love abortion. And here you see a picture of the unapologetic fire setter. And here you see the woke DA, far left lunatic, who is absolutely batshit insane. And now what do we find over here at Summit News? From Steve Watson, the brother of Paul Joseph Watson. Parents outraged as more schools push transgender materials on 3-year-old kids. Handout advises teachers to ask kindergartners for name and pronouns. And this is how the brainwashing and indoctrination happens, and it starts as early as possible for these crazed leftist lunatics who are bent upon destroying your family and civilization and the United States of America. It begins here. Parents watchdog group, Parents Defending Education, who we just heard about, has warned that a school district in Minnesota is pushing transgender and pride books and materials onto children as young as 3 years old. The group warns that St. Paul Public Schools is allowing 2 separate organizations called Amaze and Outfront Minnesota to push the materials in their schools. The PDE shared a document that shows books titled When Aiden Became a Brother, I Love My Colorful Nails and My Princess Boy, being given to preschoolers. The books are all about young boys and girls transitioning or having feelings that they are different to their biological gender. And of course, when kids are this young, we all know that kids think they are all kinds of things that they're not. Sometimes they run around pretending to be a dog. Sometimes they think they're a transformer. Sometimes they think they can fly through the sky. Just because a child has a thought of something or a feeling of something doesn't make it actual reality. But that's what the left is always attacking. Reality. They hate reality because reality is resistant to their foolish philosophies. And as you can see here, it says a further handout in the images here below advises teachers to ask students for name and pronouns and to refer students to the name/gender change request form. And I'm sure all of this will be done secretly and behind the parents' backs because that's what these little demonic creatures do. Anyway, I'll have all of this linked below. You can check this out for yourself and try not to throw up in your mouth as you go through it. And what do we have here at Natural News? Woman at Michigan School Board meeting blows whistle on litter boxes placed in school bathrooms for students who identify as cats. So, of course, just changing your gender is not good enough for them. You also need to be able to turn into other creatures. And ultimately, that is what the trans agenda will be all about in the future, the transhumanist agenda. We are simply, as the show is called on Netflix, altered carbon. Because leftists are primarily atheists and materialists in philosophy and in metaphysics, they think that humans are just a collection of atoms or a collection of subatomic particles that can be arranged and rearranged in any way that they see fit. We're pliable, always open to change, always open to be trans, this, that, or the other thing. And to them, when you begin to make these changes, that's just humans continuing the evolutionary process that already exists. You're just simply advancing it at a faster rate. And I don't feel like reading the insanity from this article here, so I'll just have it linked below and you can check it out. Next, we have something much more mundane. Taxes in California are projected to double as the failed state forces residents to pay $1,000 a month for universal sick care. And this is where they're going to be paying for all of the illegals who fled the state and fled this country and get to have so-called free medical care. And I'm just sorry to say I have very little sympathy for them. And to the people who hate this stuff the most, just get the hell out of that state. And absolutely do not bring your crazed leftist California ideals to other states that you go to. Leave that baggage behind. And as the level of insanity increases here, what do we see? Leftists now freaking out about privilege and inequality among squirrels. The New York Times has published a piece arguing that privilege and inequality are not just human issues, but also animal issues. Researchers from the University of California, Los Angeles say that because of the coronavirus, they decided to probe deeper into health disparities and other inequalities around the world, which led them to focus on squirrels, of all things. Apparently, the furry rodents suffer from many of the same societal problems that leftists say plague humans. Things like intergenerational wealth and white privilege are endemic across so many different species, says Dr. Jennifer Smith. Oh my God. One of the scientists involved with the research. Smith says it was quite surprising to see how animals supposedly face discrimination on the basis of fur color, for instance. And yes, she is dead serious in making this crazed claim. We're just touching the surface, Smith told the Times, arguing that animal survival instincts somehow equate to things like transphobia and police abuse against blacks. What in the hell? Smith explained that some species share resources such as territory, tools, and shelter between generations, which in her mind means that they are hoarding generational wealth and depriving animals of color of their fair share. In the cases of the baby red grouses, Smith says that those who are not abandoned by their fathers are more likely to succeed in establishing their own territories, while baby squirrels whose mothers hoard food for the winter are much more likely to survive until the spring. Those young, pinecone-rich squirrels, the scientist says, are children of privilege, wrote the Times about these natural phenomena. My goodness, these people are absolutely out of their minds. And there's more to this article. I'm not going to read it. You can check it out. And here in opposition to that, I have this from the Mises Institute, something I highly suggest that you read from the late, great Murray Rothbard. Egalitarianism is a revolt against nature. And in this book, you'll see here, as it says, Murray makes clear in the book's title essay, Egalitarianism is a revolt against nature, libertarianism rests on the incontrovertible fact that people are different. See, the left hates that. They say they celebrate difference, but then they always want to flatten everything to make everything the same. They want to impose their ideas of equality, which of course are always insane versions of equality, but still yet they want to impose that on everything, apparently even squirrels. It says here, Procrustean efforts to impose equality are inimical to liberty. This has not prevented egalitarianism from being the dominant ideology of our age. The court intellectuals support it, but they have no arguments to defend their views which go against human nature. Not only is equality unnatural, it contravenes the division of labor, the most important cause of a productive economy. Rothbard points out in Freedom, Inequality, Primitivism, and the Division of Labor that the division of labor depends on differences among people. An economic system based on persons who specialize in producing what they can do best vastly outstrips a society where everyone does the same work. To enforce equality is to ensure a society that can function only at a primitive level. But the left does love primitivism. The more that you read into leftism, the more they think that's fantastic, except that they also want this transhumanist agenda, which demands a very high level of technology to achieve. But nobody ever accused leftists of being consistent. They are always hypocritical and always contradictory. And anyway, I'll have this link below as well. Finally, we come to something that the left actually should be concerned about, but you'll nary hear a mention of it from them. EPA whistleblower Dr. David Lewis. Low-income neighborhoods are targeted with the land application of biosolids. Dr. David Lewis, a former senior research microbiologist with the EPA, and the Office of Research and Development warned that low-income neighborhoods are being targeted with the land application of sewage sludge or biosolids. Economically and educationally disadvantaged communities lack the political power and the economic capability of fighting it, said Lewis during a one-on-one interview with Mike Adams. In my experience, when it comes to deciding where the sewage sludge is going to be spread, it is predominantly white city councils, county officials that are deciding where it's going. It's not coincidental that it almost always ends up being in poor people's neighborhoods, African American communities, Hispanic communities, Native American reservations. That's where it's going, and those decisions are made by rich white people. But he needs to point out here that these rich white people who are doing this are leftists. Leftists always do this. They don't want it in their neighborhood. It's not in my neighborhood. It can go over there. And then they'll end up trying to blame some white supremacist for it somewhere, which is actually what they are, but they can't admit it. As the article continues here, for the uninitiated, sewage sludge is the residue resulting from the treatment of wastewater released from various sources, including homes, industries, medical facilities, street runoff, and businesses. Meanwhile, a biosolid refers to the treated sewage sludge that meets the EPA pollutant and pathogen requirements for land application and surface disposal. When we flush the toilet, it goes down through the sewers to the local waste treatment plant. The solids that settle out, which are mostly human feces and food products, are called sludge or sewage sludge. Once it is minimally treated, it is called biosolid. That's the legal term the EPA uses to describe sewage sludge that has been treated to reduce pathogens to a certain level. Then it can be applied on home gardens, school playgrounds, golf courses, or whatever as a free or cheap fertilizer. And as it points out here, there have been illnesses and deaths linked to the use of this sludge. And I'll have this article linked below. You can check it out too. Here from the Gateway Pundit, Democrats' most notable donor, George Soros, a vile creature if ever there was one, behind so much destruction and chaos across the world, pours another $125 million into the midterms. Billionaire megadonor George Soros is seeding a super PAC with $125 million, an enormous investment that will aid Democratic groups and candidates for the 2022 election cycle and beyond. And as we all know, there will be an immense amount of destruction that comes out of that. Everything that this man supports leads to death and fires and destruction all over the place. And as we've seen here before, everybody's heard about this numerous times. The famous or infamous 60 Minutes interview with him where he admitted that he helped the Nazis during World War II, and he came away with no regrets. He actually referred to it as a happy-making time, and he also, of course, said that he is an atheist. Shocker of all shockers for a leftist, of course. In the penultimate article here, China's censors ban Hollywood films as Beijing builds its own movie empire. Despite the franchise's popularity with Chinese consumers, China's censors blocked all 4 of Disney's Marvel movies released last year from being shown in the Chinese market. The films contain nothing that would obviously anger China's censors. No references to Taiwan as an independent country were included in any of the 4 films. But as Axios points out, they were banned because of what they didn't include: mass messaging that would subtly support the CCP's long-term political aims. According to Axios, the CCP leadership and President Xi, dictator Xi, have set an ambitious goal of making China a strong film power by 2035. In the title of its post, Axios also described it as a movie empire. And how could they accomplish this goal if domestic films don't dominate in their own backyard? Clearly, U.S. films pose a serious threat to this. And what you see China doing is they promote all kinds of hyper-destructive things for U.S. culture or Western culture and Western civilization. They love for that stuff to be in the Hollywood films, which they want spread all around the world, particularly in the U.S. and other Western nations, but they will not allow it to be spread in their nation. And that should tell you everything you need to know about it. And finally, I will leave you here with the ultimate results of leftism as we watch this. Wife of slain New York City police officer slams Soros-linked DA Alvin Bragg at her husband's funeral. Radical, dangerous, crazy, insane, destructive, vile, and reprehensible. And I absolutely hate it to its core. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.